Hello everyone and welcome back to Getting Started with World Creator 2. I'm Tyler and we're going to cover how to take your terrain from World Creator 2, split it up into multiple terrains, and import that into Unreal Engine 4's World Composition feature. Now this feature is almost necessary for any large-scale terrain to use in order to have the best optimization in performance in UE4. For those new to this feature, here's the essence of what world composition is and how it works. So let's assume this is our terrain. A massive terrain. If we were to use this one landscape in a game, you'd have to load the entire terrain at the launch of the level. That could be really taxing on your system. To help optimize this landscape, we split this terrain into any number of subterrains. This action of dividing up your terrain into multiple smaller terrains is the basis of what world composition is. And in UE4, each of these smaller terrains is its own level. So you can load each level independently and only work on one at a time if you want, or you can load them all and then work on the entire map at once. Completely up to how your workflow and your optimization is. So now before you even dive into World Creator 2, there are two things you need to decide or figure out. You need to decide how large you want your terrain as a whole to be. Then from that, you need to pick an optimized or recommended terrain size to divide up your terrain based on the Unreal Engine 4 landscape technical guide. Or if you want to understand how the optimized sized work, I'd recommend watching my previous video regarding the breakdown of how Unreal Engine 4's landscapes work. Then you can pop back on over here and begin. So for this tutorial, I'm just going to use 505 by 505 landscape size for each of my subterrains or each of my levels. And if we add up 4 splits by 4 splits, that gives us a total terrain size of 2020 by 2020. So 2020 by 2020 will be the terrain size we set up in World Creator 2. So here in World Creator 2, I've already made sure that my terrain sizes are 2020 by 2020 that we've just previously discussed, and our precision level is 1 meter. You can do half meter if you want, or any other precision level, but just make sure that the final output is one of UE4's recommended landscape sizes. Now, I've already gone through and done a preliminary design of our landscape here. So the first thing that we have to do to get this into UE4 is obviously export our height map. So we're gonna go up here to the export tab right here. We're gonna make sure our settings under the surface tab is set to height. I prefer to use raw. It is the most raw that you can get, obviously. There are some other options, but make sure that it is a 16-bit image. As you can see right here, the bit depth. Best fit, make sure it's under the Windows version, unless you're using the Mac version to export this. Then we're going to make sure our game engine is selected to Unreal. You've got none, Unity, and Unreal as your options. So we're going to make sure Unreal is selected. Then what we need to do is we need to make sure to flip our Ys because Unreal Engine 4 inputs them with the Ys flipped. Now we're going to make sure that the split option is selected. And here you're going to input the 505 by 505 tile size. And this is going to be what it splits up our main terrain with. Do not flip the Y here. This is going to flip the tile Ys individually, but the flip Y or flip X up here is the global flips, which is what we're after. So only flip this Y, not this Y, unless you're wanting to do a certain use case. Now, when you're splitting the terrain for Unreal Engine, you need to make sure to include the border. So what's this going to do is, let's pop on over to Unreal Engine 4 real quick. So here you can see that I've got 2 different terrains here in Unreal Engine 4, which is basically just the starter terrain in World Creator 2. On the left side here, I've got this terrain with the included border turned off. And our terrain here on the right is with the included border turned on. And to showcase the differences here, let's zoom into our terrain here on the left that does not have the border included. And right away, you can already see the issue. If we zoom in a little bit further, you can see what's happening here. So if you don't include the border, then both tile sets aren't going to include this single strand of what's supposed to be shared vertices. You can see right here, they're supposed to be connected at this point and in each one of these quadrants. If we go to the same location on the terrain that had the border included, if we go ahead and select one of these tiles, if we zoom in, you can see that both of these tiles have the exact same vertices lined up. So that's with the border included. So you always need to make sure that that option is checked when you're doing the world composition split. Now back in World Creator 2, once we have all these settings set up, we can go ahead and click export, and be sure that if you want your Z values to match up to World Creator 2, to remember this Z scale number here, just like we discussed in the previous video. You don't have to scale it to match World Creator 2 if you don't want to. You could set the height scale to whatever you want. But for those who want to match, just be sure to remember this number. Now that our terrain has been split and exported, let's look back at this graphic. You may have noticed that the tile number 1 is in the top left. It is in this location because in the top left corner is the origin point at which UE4 imports the terrain. This is one of the reasons why we must flip the Y coordinates to all Unreal Engine 4 landscapes. From this origin point, this is how all of our split terrains will be named as a suffix in the file structure. Here you will see how each tile will be named, starting with the X coordinates first, then the Y's. I've created this graphic to further showcase the naming scheme per terrain split. You'll also notice that the first tile starts off with 0. This is one of the values that Unreal Engine 4 starts with. So instead of a 1, 2, 3, 4 naming scheme, they start out with 0 as their beginning value. Feel free to pause this video at any time to stare and look at this graphic a little bit further to understand the order of operations here. And if I were to go ahead and import this graphic as a texture in World Creator 2, you could really see three-dimensionally how this terrain that we created will be split up and imported into Unreal Engine 4. And looking at the files in Windows Explorer, you can see all of our height maps have the corresponding suffixes added to them automatically. So have Unreal Engine launched here, and one thing that you need to make sure that you have open is your levels tab right down here to the bottom left. This is where I've put it, but if you don't have that open, which is not open by default, go up here to Window, then go down and make sure the Levels category or Levels window is checked on. Then after you have your starting level loaded, over here to the right under World Settings, we need to enable World Composition because it's not on by default. So under World Settings, if we go to the World subcategory, and right here, if we enable World Composition, just go ahead and click check. And then before you do anything else, you need to make sure that you save the current level. You could do that here or right here under the new levels window that you have. If you click this little green pencil, you can save the level. And then after we saved it, we're going to go ahead and click this little drop down box here. Then we're going to go and import tiled landscape. And then this window is going to pop up and it's going to give you some options. Then we're right here at the top going to select our height maps that we've made. And you don't select one, you literally select all of your maps and click open. And then right here it says it's found 16 images. Each of those are 505 by 505 tiles, and for a total landscape of 2020 by 2020. It's already pegged everything out for us. It's even made sure that tile size is optimized by go ahead and setting up our sections and quads and components automatically. You don't have to do anything. That's why in the beginning, you need to make sure that you have one of the optimal sizes so all of this works flawlessly. And if you remember in World Creator 2, we've already globally flipped our Ys. So by default in UE4, this flip Y coordinate is always going to be on. So just uncheck it. If you didn't flip your Ys globally in World Creator 2, then having this checked is okay. And if you remember that our Z height in World Creator 2 was 4626. So I'm going to input here that value, 4626. You don't have to do this, set it whatever height you want. I'm just make sure that I match World Creator 2. And then it's as easy as selecting import. I do want to go back and point out to my height map naming here. You will notice that in each one of these height maps that I do not have any obscure symbols in there. I only have just raw text and numbers and an underscore. Anything like a period in your nomenclature or your file naming systems will not import correctly. It'll give you an error and you won't know what that error is until you spend time and time trying to figure out what the heck it is. So do not put a period or any other obscure symbol as far as your naming of your file structure. So here under our levels box here, let me pull this out. So if I explain this a little bit further, it has imported each one of our height maps and they're grayed out. By them being grayed out means that they haven't been loaded into the map. You could right click one of these and select load, or under here, I want to go ahead and point out if you summon world composition, it brings you up to this new window and it has oriented our terrain based on that original point. Remember, this was the first tile. this was the second tile. So our first tile is going to be oriented based on Unreal's origin point. If we select all of these, we could also right click and load. So let's go ahead and do that. So now if we go back, it has loaded all of our tiles in. You see over here in the levels window, all of our tiles are not gray anymore. They're more of a brighter white, and we can actually click on each one of our tiles. So let's go back to the world composition window here. So you can see all of our tiles here are loaded, but I want the center of this landscape to be on the center of the origin. That's no problem. If we just select all of our tiles, then we just click, hold, and drag, it snaps our terrain to any of the inbuilt grids, and we've tried to line up the center of our terrain. There, it's snapped exactly in the middle, as you can see here. You can even click one of these terrains and pull them off, and inside the editor, you will see that that particular terrain is pulled off. Let's just put this right back where it was. This moving of tiles will only work if every single tile is exactly the same size. So that's why we've made sure that each one of our tiles are 505 by 505. Also, say we like this, but we want, there to be a little bit more to this. If you had created something that wasn't a perfect square, but a rectangle here, you could add even a rectangle. You could have a terrain that looks something like this if you want. It doesn't matter. It's all about how you've set up your game. So let's put these back here before we forget where they went. Coincidentally, within this world composition view, if you select one tile and right click it, you can add an adjacent landscape to this level. So we can add one to the left side, one to the top, bottom, and right. So this is handy if, say, you want to keep adding and you want to do the landscape sculpting or texturing. It will seamlessly go from one piece of the landscape to another piece of the landscape. And just like before, if we select one of our tiles here and zoom in the crack between, we could see that both of these are exactly seamless together because we share the border. Next, let's go ahead and redo this process, except this time we're going to make sure that our textures that we have in World Creator 2 are lined up in Unreal Engine 4 as well. Okay, so back in World Creator 2, you can see that I've got all of my textures here, and it's quite a bit of textures for this tutorial, but it's a test that I was doing earlier. But anyway, what I would do is the first thing that you need to make sure is that your tags here are named something that you'll remember in the order that they are going to be. So for simplistic sakes for this guide, I've just named each one of them starting with the number scheme that UE4 uses. So for the base layer, I've just tagged it as 0. And the second layer is 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. That way, if we go to the export tab, we're going to export the heat maps of these. I don't want the textures, but I want the heat maps or the weight maps. Going to select textures. PNG is fine. And to remember to flip the Y globally, we're going to split each of these into a 505 by 505 size. And remember, do not flip the tiles, but only the global. And then you can see here, each one of my textures are in order from 0 to 6. So we have 7 textures total. Be sure to include the border so that everything's match up. And we can go ahead and click export. Once exported, you can see it has exported a plethora of weight maps or heat maps for our textures. It has gone from, let's go ahead and change our view to details, a lot. There should be 64 of them. So you can see I just named it weight map and then text. Text would be the name of the layer itself. What matters is these double numbers here in the middle. So this first string of images here is our first 16 for our first tile. So now let's get these into Unreal Engine 4. But before we bring all of those in, you need to go ahead and work on your material structure, your material layouts. So for guide's sake on seeing the import process, we need to make sure that our material is already kind of pre-set up. You wouldn't necessarily have to do this up front. You can do it later, but I'm going to show you the quickest way to get your weight maps in there without having to worry about how to do this aftermath. So you want to go ahead and make sure that your material layers are set up. So I already have that set up here. Let's go ahead and load our material layer. So what I've done is, as you can remember in our previous video, you right click and type layer blend. So we're going to add a layer blend node. With that node, we're going to keep hitting this plus till we have 7 elements, and we need to rename each one of these elements here. You can see 0, 1, and 2. And for me, remember in World Creator 2, I named the tags 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is for me to remember that, hey, this is the 0 layer, so it matches up with the 0 texture. Name it however you want. It's perfectly fine. So once you have all of these layers named however you want, you need to add the sample textures in here, or the texture samples, by right-clicking and type in texture sample. There we go. So if we add a texture sample parameter 2D node, that is basically the exact same thing as we add here. Or if you set it up right, instead of a texture sample, it would be great if this was a material function node. That way you can add multiple different types of textures per layer. It can get complicated. We're just going to showcase the simple version of this. And then I've added a landscape coordinate node. So you right click and type in landscape and then landscape layer chords. If you click on this, what you can basically do is change the mapping size. So each one of these textures that I have imported from Megascans is a 4K texture. And I want to increase those sizes a little bit in the engine, as it's only going to import as like a 1 meter image, I believe it is. So if we're going to scale these 4K images up to 6 meters by 6 meters. And then, so our terrain isn't so glossy for this tutorial, I've just held down the 1 and clicked and add a single constant node of value of 1 into our roughness shader here, so that the terrain isn't too shiny for this example. So once you have this set up, you want to apply it, and then we're just going to go ahead and save it. Now, after everything is set up there, we can go ahead and go back to our levels here, import tiled landscape, go ahead and select our height map tiles. So we're going to go back to where these were, select all of our height maps, click open, be sure to uncheck the flip Y. I remember this was 4626. And now this time under the material category, we're going to click it. And then we're going to select our material landscape here. So if we scroll down on the materials that we've got here, material landscape, click that. And now you can see automatically all those layers that we had made in the layer blend node and what we've named them are all right here. So now we need to go through and select all the weight maps or heat maps that we exported from World Creator 2 per one of these images. So we're going to select the one, and we have our textures here. So let me bring this to the side. So this is one reason why I've named it the way I've named it. This base layer is technically layered 0, 0. So you can see the 0, 0s here in the center are going to be inputted on this first blank. And the 1 here is going to be inputted on the 1 slot. So since we have the 0, 0 selected, we're going to select all the 0, 0 numbers. Click open, it registered 16. Select it again. We're going to make sure all the 1s are selected, then all the 2s, so on and so forth. I'm going to speed this up real quick since you get the gist. Okay, so we have all our weight maps imported. There are 16 images per weight map since our tiles are 16 tiles. Now all we have to do is click import, and it's going to import all of this in one hit. Now this is one good thing to point out. Once it's done loading and you have this issue where none of the height maps are showing, that's okay. You can either A, double click on your level to reload it. And for me, that worked. If that didn't work, you could go to File, create a new level, and then load that level, then load back your original level. You need to basically, what you're having to do is refresh the levels. So now since I've double clicked our original level here, our persistent level, as you can see in the top, which is blue, it has brought in all of our height maps back. So we're going to go ahead and select all of our height maps, right click and select load. Perfect, and now it has imported everything exactly the way it was in World Creator 2. Let's just real quickly go to our world composition screen. We have everything selected and pop this puppy back in the origin spot where it needs to be. Exit out of that. Let's zoom over here, and everything imported just perfectly. Everything is exactly where it was in World Creator 2, except this time I haven't set up materials too great in here, but the material is exactly what I used in World Creator 2, but it's the actual material, not a material export from World Creator 2. This is all done manually within UE4, and that is the way I recommend doing it. So that is the basic workflow to getting your terrain into Unreal Engine 4 through world composition. If you like, I can dive into UE4 more specifically into the material setup realm, so let me know in the comments below what you'd like to see and I'll be sure to try and cover it when I can. Thank you everyone for joining me in this video. Till next time, I'll see you in the next one.